You picture it clearly, your own jet waiting quietly on the tarmac, engines humming softly while you skip security lines completely and entirely. No crowded terminals, no delayed flights, just a private cabin and a pilot who waits patiently for your exact daily travel schedule. Board whenever you want, land wherever you need, and glide above the traffic while everyone else sits stuck on a crowded runway. That is the glossy dream luxury magazines and social media influencers sell you, the private jet as pure effortless daily personal freedom. Here is what almost nobody tells you before you sign that purchase agreement and become the proud, exhausted owner of an aircraft. Owning a private jet was never really about simply skipping lines or escaping the hassle of a crowded commercial airport terminal entirely. It was about absorbing a depreciation curve so brutal that most owners quietly lose value every single hour the engines sit idle. Start with the number that shocks almost every new buyer: the true hourly cost once every fixed and variable expense is included. A light jet flown only 100 hours a year can carry a true cost between $3,500 and $6,000 hourly. That number sounds impossible until you remember fixed costs do not care whether the aircraft flies constantly or sits quietly parked idle. Annual fixed costs alone typically range from $500,000 to $2 million, regardless of how often the jet actually flies. Variable costs stack on top of that, reaching up to $5,000 per flight hour once fuel and maintenance are included. Fuel alone can account for 25 to 40% of total hourly operating cost, depending on the specific aircraft you own. A single fill-up on a larger jet can easily exceed $30,000, disappearing before the aircraft even leaves the runway. Maintenance costs stack on top of fuel, with major inspections and engine programs adding hundreds of thousands more across a typical decade. A 10-year airframe inspection alone can cost more than $500,000, regardless of how carefully the aircraft was flown. So what is the actual trap hiding underneath the glossy photos of leather seats and champagne glasses in the glossy sales brochure? The trap is that a private jet is not really a vehicle, it is a rapidly depreciating asset disguised as a status symbol. New jets typically lose 10 to 15% of their value in the very first year alone, before you even finish paying for it. After that first painful drop, most jets continue losing another 5 to 10% of remaining value every single following year afterward. A new $70 million ultra-long-range aircraft can lose $10 million in value within the first 24 months. Pilot salaries represent one of the largest fixed costs, with a two-pilot crew costing between $250,000 and $450,000. Hangar fees at major airports can range from $45,000 to $180,000 every single year, depending on location. So who actually gets rich from the private jet you are dreaming about buying this year with your hard-earned personal fortune? Aircraft manufacturers get rich first, selling a rapidly depreciating asset at a premium price before that same asset loses value almost immediately. Management companies get rich next, charging 10 to 15% of your annual operating cost just to handle logistics you could never manage alone. Maintenance providers get rich billing hundreds of thousands of dollars for major inspections that regulations require regardless of how little you actually fly. Insurance companies get rich charging steep premiums on an asset that carries significant liability risk every single time it leaves the ground. Fuel suppliers get rich charging premium prices at private terminals, knowing owners rarely shop around while their jet waits fully fueled up. Financing companies get rich too, collecting interest on multi-million-dollar loans whether the aircraft flies often or sits mostly idle and unused. And fractional ownership companies get rich because they can spread fixed costs across many owners while charging each one a healthy management fee. The small individual jet owner, meanwhile, often flies far fewer hours than needed to ever justify the aircraft's enormous fixed costs annually. This is the quiet architecture of private aviation wealth, where fees, depreciation, and financing flow upward long before any convenience truly pays off. The private jet itself was never really about the plane sitting quietly on the tarmac, waiting for its owner to finally arrive. It was about who understood utilization rates well enough to build an entire thriving business around other people's underused, depreciating aircraft fleet. Consider Richard Santulli, a former mathematician and Goldman Sachs executive who bought a small charter company called Executive Jet back in 1984. Santulli studied 20 years of pilot logbooks and noticed something obvious that nobody else in the industry had bothered to examine closely. Most private jet owners were flying their aircraft far too few hours to ever justify the enormous fixed costs they were quietly absorbing. In 1986, Santulli launched NetJets, introducing fractional ownership, letting customers buy a small share of a jet instead of the whole aircraft. Owners could purchase as little as 1/16 of an aircraft, paying only for the hours they actually expected to fly each year. NetJets handled the pilots, the maintenance, the hangar space, and the scheduling, solving the exact utilization problem that quietly bankrupts private owners. The company standardized training across its entire fleet, having pilots fly only one aircraft type instead of juggling several different models constantly. That single focus on training and consistency became a major selling point, separating NetJets sharply from smaller, less disciplined charter operators nearby. Warren Buffett became a satisfied NetJets customer in 1995, flying fractional shares years before he ever considered buying the company itself. In 1998, Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway acquired NetJets for $725 million, split between cash and company stock. By 1999, NetJets had purchased nearly 600 planes worth $10 billion, roughly 40% of the entire world's business jet market. Santulli did not get rich owning a single private jet, he got rich solving the utilization problem that plagues every individual jet owner. So should you actually buy a private jet this year? Or is this simply another glossy trap dressed up as ultimate freedom? The optimist case looks like this: you fly consistently above 250 hours a year, and ownership genuinely beats chartering every single time. Your schedule stays predictable, your aircraft stays properly utilized, and the fixed costs spread thin enough across enough hours to make sense. The realist case looks messier. You fly closer to 100 hours a year, and your true hourly cost balloons far beyond charter pricing. You still enjoy the convenience, but the math quietly favors chartering or fractional ownership over the enormous burden of full aircraft ownership. The worst case looks like this: your flying needs shrink suddenly, and you are stuck paying massive fixed costs for an aircraft that barely flies. You sell at a steep discount just to escape ownership costs that no longer match the actual travel your life requires anymore. A mid-sized jet, purchased for roughly $10 million, can cost another $2 to $3 million annually just to operate properly. Depreciation quietly compounds this problem, since the aircraft loses significant resale value at the exact same time it drains operating cash flow. That operating cost alone can quietly exceed the original purchase price within just 4 or 5 short years of continuous private ownership. This does not mean private jets are worthless purchases. It means they reward extremely high, consistent utilization far more than occasional convenience. The people who benefit long-term are rarely casual flyers. They are executives and families who genuinely fly hundreds of hours every year. Scale changes everything here too, because fractional operators spread fixed costs across many owners in ways no single individual buyer ever could. One slow travel month barely dents a massive fractional fleet, while that same slow month can crush a single owner's entire annual budget. This is why fractional programs keep growing while individual owners keep quietly selling their aircraft and returning to chartered or commercial flights. The math simply does not lie, even when the glossy brochure photos make private ownership look like effortless, guaranteed personal freedom always. If you do decide to buy a jet, honestly calculate your true annual flight hours before you ever sign a single purchase document. Study your realistic utilization, your true depreciation curve, and your actual fixed costs before committing several $1 million to full aircraft ownership. Talk to current owners in your category, not just brokers who profit the moment your signature finally lands on the closing paperwork. Underwrite conservatively, assume higher operating costs than advertised, and never assume convenience alone will justify an asset that loses value this fast. The private jet was never really about the shiny wings sitting quietly on the tarmac waiting for its very next scheduled departure. It was about the real difference between someone who understands utilization and someone who simply bought a beautiful, rapidly depreciating flying machine. Real wealth in private aviation rarely looks like the glossy photos. It looks like fractional shares, careful math, and honest utilization tracking. The silent millionaires in this space are not the ones posting cabin selfies online. They are the quiet, methodical fleet operators instead. They are the ones who tracked utilization rates, depreciation curves, and fixed costs long before anyone else even considered the real math. They understood something simple, that a private jet is not truly a status symbol. It is a brutal depreciation curve wearing leather seats. That leather cabin is comfortable to photograph, but underneath it sits heavy crew salaries, hangar fees, and relentless scheduled maintenance costs weekly. This pattern, hidden wealth dressed as simple luxury, repeats across almost every prestige purchase people believe will make them look truly successful. It shows up in yachts, exotic cars, vacation homes, and private clubs, wherever a glossy image hides a demanding depreciation curve underneath. The real money almost never sits with the individual owner, it sits one layer above, with whoever built the fractional platform instead. And that is the pattern this channel keeps returning to, again and again. The silent, unglamorous truth hiding behind every glossy financial dream. If private jets taught you anything today, let it be this simple lesson: look past the cabin and study the actual utilization math. Because somewhere behind every smooth takeoff you will ever enjoy, someone else already quietly built the system that profits before you do. That is the real lesson of the silent millionaire. Wealth always prefers structure, utilization, and patience over status, luxury, and easy promises. Next time someone romanticizes owning a private jet, remember Richard Santuli's pilot logbooks: not a single champagne glass on a leather seat. His fortune came from solving a utilization problem, not from personally flying a private jet somewhere expensive and photogenic decades ago today. Somewhere right now, a quiet operator is calculating fleet utilization nobody notices, while someone else photographs a cabin interior for social media. That quiet operator will very likely still profit from aviation in 20 years, while the flashy owner has already sold at a loss. This is not a reason to avoid private aviation entirely. It is a reason to approach it with humility, math, and patience. The private jet can absolutely make sense financially, but only for people willing to fly enough hours to justify the enormous fixed costs. Every number in this video came from real industry data, real transactions, and real companies that actually built lasting aviation fortunes over decades. Richard Santuli started by carefully studying old pilot logbooks and built one of the largest fractional aviation companies in the entire world. You do not need his exact scale to benefit from his lesson. Utilization and patience beat status in nearly every private aviation decision. The next time someone shows you a beautiful private jet online, ask about their actual flight hours before you ever ask about the interior. Ask about true depreciation, fixed costs, and realistic utilization before you ask about legroom, champagne service, or the leather seat color choice. The silent millionaires already asked those boring, unglamorous questions years ago, quietly, without an audience, long before they ever profited from aviation. That is exactly why they are wealthy, and why so many louder, more excited buyers are still absorbing their very first depreciation hit. None of this requires enormous luck. It simply requires patience, honest math, and the discipline to track every single utilization hour carefully. Most people regret buying a private jet not because flying disappointed them, but because the true costs never matched their actual travel needs. Regret rarely comes from the flying itself, it comes from the fixed costs that kept arriving whether the jet flew or not. Selling a barely used jet often means absorbing a painful loss, right when the owner needs real cash flexibility the most anyway. Wealth built around private aviation consistently rewards utilization over status, patience over impulse, and honest math over glossy cabin photographs always somehow. The dream of the private jet is not entirely fake, it is simply incomplete, missing the brutal depreciation curve hiding beneath the leather. That missing piece is rarely mentioned in glossy advertisements, because depreciation simply does not photograph nearly as well as a champagne toast. Fill in that missing math honestly, and the dream slowly becomes a real, sustainable decision instead of an expensive, disappointing financial lesson. Every silent fortune in aviation was built the exact same quiet way. One honest utilization number, one careful decision at a time. Private jets, yachts, vacation homes, and exotic cars. The packaging always changes, but the underlying architecture of who profits first stays identical. Understand that hidden architecture just once, and you will start seeing it everywhere else that money quietly moves, far beyond aviation itself. That is the real education hiding inside every private jet story, far more valuable than any single flight you could ever take. Because once you finally see who profits first, you can decide with clear eyes wide open whether you want to play this game. And if you do choose to play it exactly like Richard Santuli, with patience, structure, and total contempt for the easy dream. The silent millionaire is never the loudest voice on the tarmac. They are simply the last quiet operator still standing after the cycle turns. Subscribe if you want more stories exactly like this one where we quietly take apart the loud dreams that everyone else keeps selling. Because the real money was never inside the cabin everyone loves to photograph, it was always hiding in the utilization math nobody discusses. And that pattern, hidden in plain sight the entire time, is exactly where this channel will keep looking for the very next silent fortune.